Okay, hello everyone. Thank you, Sophia, for taking part in this. This is TAFSIG podcast with Sophia Vanttinen-Newton about teacher emoticon usage in assignment feedback. So if I could just very quickly ask Sophia to possibly introduce herself. Could you say a few words about yourself, Sophia?
Sure, Jo. Thank you very much. So, yeah, my name's Sophia. I'm currently an EAP coordinator on the IFP at Bristol. Like many, I began my career in teaching English as a foreign language abroad. I then moved into the EAP arena, and more recently, I've been looking at a research area. So, looking at the use, so student perceptions of teacher emoticon usage in assignment feedback. So. That's been in the last year or two. I've been working in emoticon usage and looking at emoticon usage in a digital environment as well.
That sounds super interesting. So this is why we've got a few questions for you. We've got 4 questions in total. Number 1 is why your interest in the use of emoticons in feedback?
Sure, yeah, it's a good question. So I guess my love affair with emoticons started in Japan. So back in 2010 when I was on the JET program, the Japanese were very much ahead with emoticons in terms of their usage of them on the Japanese Keitai, my Japanese mobile. I had many emoticons and I was quite fascinated by them when I was out in Japan. And then we've seen the rise of the emoticon, and they've become a very common paralinguistic tool in non-verbal communications. So with them appearing on our mobile phones in non-verbal communication, in digital online environments, in emails, on chat messaging, Facebook messaging, etc. So they've kind of really come into force and onto the scene in the last 10 years in the UK. So I'm quite fascinated in them as a non-verbal paralinguistic tool. So I'm looking at, specifically looked at in this research is looking at how they communicated the intended illocutionary force of written comments. So that's what I was mainly interested in, and looking at how they punctuate text and they can communicate both emotionality and the intended meaning of the person who's writing a particular comment. I was also really interested in looking at how emoticon might be able to help students to engage with feedback comments. So looking at assessment feedback comments, because quite often, students are not reading their feedback comments, and it's helping them engage better with that feedback. And the kind of central question that I was really answering in this research is, does the presence of emoticon in individual written assignment feedback, does it actually have any effect on how the tutor feedback comments are understood by the recipient of that feedback? So do they actually change anything in how that student understands the feedback? And I was also, so I first came into contact with emoticon again in the UK through my master's in applied linguistics. So I was looking at a language and new media module at Birmingham, and I was on the applied linguistics course. We were looking at the nature of the relationship between written feedback and emoticons, and because they are the two have quite a special relationship. So there was a lot of research in the area of emoticons. So primarily I was looking at a study by Forsyth and Johnson. So that was in 2017. And they identified that accessibility and emotional aspects of receiving feedback are the two most important aspects in facilitating engagement with and acceptance of feedback. So again, it comes back to this idea of the emotional aspect of receiving feedback, and the link, and to see really if there was anything that emoticons could do to help students feel more positive about their feedback. So Tuan McKinney and Roberts in 2004, they looked at how emoticons help to build online digital communities in an online course. And we're increasingly hosting sessions online at the moment, or having completely online courses. So they looked at how emoticons help to increase social presence and reduce transactional distance in higher education environments. So quite often in those online environments, we've got lack of a concrete social context, and they were looking at the ability of emoticons to help communicate emotions and give meaning to that context. So yeah, and another recent study, very recent study, was in 2020 by Moffat, Paget and Grieve, and they were looking, so quite similar to my research, they were looking at how instructors and teachers can use positively valenced emoticons rather, to inject a sense of fun, warmth and emotionality into written online feedback. So they were looking at online feedback only. In my research, I was looking at written feedback comments, which weren't necessarily delivered in an online environment. Their study looked at the ability of emoticons to inject this warmth, fun and emotionality without sacrificing the professional integrity of the person giving the feedback. So yeah, I think this study was looking also about the student perceptions of teacher emoticon usage and whether students feel it's appropriate for instructors to use emoticons themselves. So yeah, that's where the interest in the use of emoticons comes from. So it's partly from an applied linguistics background that I have, and also the recent research that is indicating that emoticons are really important for social presence and reducing that transactional distance between teachers and students.
Great. Well, that sounds very interesting, I have to say. And I suppose we could talk much longer about this. Yeah, but thank you very much. I think.
Yeah, great.
It really sounds very, very interesting. And I think especially now when we are talking about online learning and teaching, and you were talking a lot about the distance between the teachers and the students, and now possibly even more. This is why I think this work is getting even more interesting and more important.
Yeah, I think it's a very relevant time.
Thank you very much for. Yeah, exactly. So you probably didn't think that when you were starting this research.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's kind of, fell at the right time in many ways. It's great.
There you go. Unexpected, an unexpected turn. Okay, let's move to the second question, which is, in your research, what did you find in terms of implications for the use of emoticons in pedagogic feedback? But in particular here, I wanted to ask about the implications for students.
Yeah, I think the second question there is really, really relevant, because at the heart of this research, I was looking at whether emoticons actually help students to receive their feedback more positively. So yeah, in terms of the implications or the results of the research, so there were very positive implications from the qualitative and the quantitative research that I carried out. So I surveyed students and asked them a couple of questions as a result of looking at assignment essay feedback, which contained teacher feedback comments with emoticons in there. And then I talked to students at some length as well in qualitative interviews, and asked them in a little bit more detail what they felt about the teacher feedback comments which contained emoticons. So these implications are the results such of the study. So students said that they felt that emoticons had some power to acknowledge the positive work that they had done. Mm-hmm. And one student also said it allowed him to reflect on his writing a lot more. So he was talking about, it's kind of a quite interesting light bulb moment for him, where he, suddenly remembered that there was a reader reading his work, as well as him just being somebody who writes an essay or writes a report. So it was this reflection on writing that was quite interesting that came out of it.
Yeah.
The acknowledgement of the positive student work as well, I think, is important, because quite often as teachers, when we're giving feedback, we just tend to focus on the less good aspects of the work rather than the positive aspects. And as instructors and teachers, we want students to actually replicate the positive, the things they're doing well in their work. So that was one implication. The second implication, I'd say, of the 18 students that actually did the study, took part in the study, quite a lot of them talked about this ability of emoticons to reduce the transactional distance between themselves and the person giving the feedback. And they liked seeing positive teacher emotions or positive teacher reactions to what they had produced. They kind of got a kick out of that, which was really good, really nice for them. So yeah, those were the two kind of very positive aspects or positive implications of the research that students reported. Another student reported that it gave her this sense of a dialogic feedback loop happening with the actual feedback from the teacher. So she said it helped her in creating a conversation with the teacher. She said when she saw the emoticons, she could think about what the teacher was thinking when they gave the feedback. And she said as a result, it helped her to engage more with the comments. She said, just getting feedback without emoticon, she said it felt it was a bit more dry than seeing the positive teacher emotions, or the slightly confused sometimes teacher emotions as well, because there was a little scratching chin face in there that I used. So that was the scratching chin emoticon I deliberately used to show that, the message was unsure or unclear. So those were the positive implications. In terms of, this was quite a small study, so it wasn't clear whether from the results whether the emoticons were helpful in terms of just encouraging and motivating students to engage with their feedback, or whether they actually helped students to understand the feedback comments. So there was a lot of students saying, well, I really enjoyed seeing a smiley face, or an academic mortarboard symbol, because that showed me that my work was good. They enjoyed seeing the scratching chin face because that alerted them to the fact that something wasn't unclear. But actually, in understanding the comments, the results didn't show whether that helped. So that's an area for further consideration. There was one student as well that felt quite strongly about the unprofessional nature of using emoticons. So she said it actually appeared, for her, it undermined the professionalism of the teacher. So she felt that the teacher came across as far less professional with the use of emoticons than not. So that's something I think that needs further exploration.
But that was one, I'm sorry to interrupt, that was one student you said, yeah?
That was one student, yeah.
How big was this sample? How many?
So the sample was 18 students. It's a very small scale sample, yeah, overall. So that was 1 out of 18.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess the results indicate that there's a stronger sense that students feel it is professional as opposed to unprofessional. Yeah.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much. So the implications, I assume you shared anything that you thought was important. That leads basically to the next one, the limitations. You've actually started talking about those a little bit already.
Yeah, I think it's
anything.
Sorry, Joe. Yeah,
that's all right.
So yeah, I guess it's the small scale study because it's only 18 students in total. So looking forward and what I'm going to do with this study later, I think it's difficult at this stage to draw any concrete attitudes to the use of emoticons in the feedback. And yeah, a much larger scale study I think would be needed to see or to gather more evidence, I think, of that. Definitely the first research question as to how professional it is for teachers to use it. and also to gain access, I think, to that other research question, which was looking at whether the emoticons actually help students to understand the feedback comments. Those are the two areas I think I'd like to look at in more detail.
Brilliant. So that's, yes. Is that on your agenda then? That's the final question. So what's next, basically?
Yeah. So what's next? So I'd definitely like to extend this study so to a much wider study group, and to look at similar research questions amongst a wider cohort. One variable that I was hoping to look at, and I did look at in this study, was the cross-cultural variable. So looking at whether there was a difference of opinion amongst different nationality groups. I think that was my third research question. In terms of the participants that I had in this study, it was difficult to draw kind of conclusions across different nationalities because I had many students from different nationalities. So with a wider cohort and a wider sample, it would allow me to draw more kind of concrete, conclusions of that. And then in my role at Bristol at the moment, so teaching on the IFP, where we're teaching in an online environment, so in Blackboard Collaborate sessions, I'm really interested at the moment how my students are using the chat messaging function in Blackboard Collaborate. They love using emoticons. I've been using emoticons with them as well to clarify all manner of things about teaching, about their learning as well. So I would like to take part in some kind of study looking at the chat messaging function and how students perceive teacher emoticon usage in the chat messaging function and how they help to clarify the meaning of different aspects like assignment feedback and the learning in general. I think the Doiron sample I was talking about earlier is very interesting because Doiron looks at whether a glossary of emoticons can be co-constructed amongst learners. So what I'll be looking at in over the next year with my IFP students is looking at creating a glossary of emoticons that we can use in our Blackboard Collaborate sessions. And we can basically clarify the intended meaning of what we're talking about in class.
Okay.
So lots of interesting directions.
Yeah.
Emoticons, and I think this is quite kind of topical at the moment because during this COVID period, when we're engaging in a lot of online distance learning, it's quite a timely period to be looking at it.
Yes, especially if it can be so helpful because your findings clearly indicate that it can indeed be quite helpful for the students and for the teachers. I found the making feedback dialogic through the use of emoticons probably most interesting for me at this point, because there is a lot of talk about making feedback more dialogic, so students actually, so we can have that conversation with the students, and that's a really good point here with the emoticons that can help with that potentially.
Definitely, yeah, I very much agree with you there. I think the dialogic element is really important right now, particularly in an online environment as well, where that naturally is going to become a little bit more challenging. Definitely.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much, Sophia. Thank you ever so much.
No, thank you.
I'm just looking at the slide. We don't have a scratchy face here. I think that was my favorite of the ones that you've used. Okay, lovely. Thank you ever so much. Thank you for sharing a few references with us here as well. Thank you ever so much for your time. Thank you for your research, and we are hoping to hear and see much more from you in the coming months, either at the conferences or maybe in a blog post or a publication. That'd be lovely. And good luck with your research. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jo. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.